You are tuned in to Frivolous Gravitas. Please stand by. Just kidding. Hello and welcome, tuner inners around the world on iTunes and YouTube. I'm your peasant co-host, Christopher Driver, and with me, as always, is my lion-hearted co-host, Mr. Jordan Roy. Today, we're crossing the Rubicon and dancing the rain to talk about our cultural and personal emblems of virtue. That is to say, we're here to speak on ideas of heroes, their social functions as concepts, and our use as interpretations of such ideas as a people. To start us off on today's quest for understanding, Jordan, how about you tell us a bit about the ideological constitution of people who embody the ideals that beset them?
What? Oh.
Tell us a bit about what we're talking about.
Okay. So I want to talk about heroes today, and that's mostly because I kind of have a middle of the road opinion of them. Half of it is based on the fact that like heroes are necessary in some respects, but at the same time we need to temper that with the fact that heroes are very dangerous, and they also are different in fact and fiction, and a lot of times it depends on how we construct them and how we view them and what they actually are. So for the sake of conversation, a hero or someone that we would look up to isn't just someone that we would look up to. The way I kind of put it up is someone who has a display or performs qualities worthy of admiration. This could be anything like actions, as in something like a war hero, where doesn't really matter who they are, that gets shoved off and they perform something where they go above and beyond some sort of duty without regard to their own well-being. This also could be like a great deed. Specifically, and a good example of this would be the 9/11 first responders who, the buildings fall and they just go in and show up and help without whether they were on or off duty. It didn't matter. Things need to get done.
So is it always in the interest of other people that they have to self-sacrifice? That makes them heroes?
No, not at all. Because sometimes the deed is like a selfish deed also can be considered heroic. A lot of people consider people who, a rags to riches story kind of thing. Like you get someone who works their butt off and, overcomes adversity and makes it to become a, mover and shaker in the world. And it's like, that's someone I look up to. That's someone out of, who made themselves, the self-made man is a sort of a hero in democratic societies because it's a symbol of social mobility. This person who doesn't matter. If you have the character to make it, you can make it as long as you put the work in. This is selfish, but it's also a display of a certain type of heroism. And also there also is, you can also see heroism in character. So people have character that we can look up to. You have someone like Martin Luther King who would just kind of shove off any, I guess, racial tensions that he was being bombarded with, because he's like, no, what I'm doing is more important. He would shove off, people of his own side wanting to be militant. He's like, that's not what I'm about. And he would, he went up there in front of the entire nation and spoke his mind. Now, to me, this is, message or not, that's heroic in itself. And then he puts forth a message of peace during a time of war, and that's pretty heroic. Selfish and selfishness doesn't really go into that. His character and his message are what's important. And so the man is an exemplar of character. Now there would be someone like St. Francis of Assisi. Okay, we're going a bit old school here, but people look up to him because he wasn't this like, look how fancy my robes are. He's literally saying like, no, this isn't about sorry, I got to catch my breath there a bit. This isn't about wealth. This religion is about living as Jesus would, and so he tried to do that as much as possible. And whether or not you agree with him, his actions and the character of that were heroic to some extent. Although whether or not those stories are real doesn't really matter at this point. So you have people who displays these qualities worthy of admiration and
there's always
emulation.
That element of like subjecting oneself to self-harm for the greater good, for a greater purpose or cause, right?
Yeah, a greater purpose. I don't know about the greater good, because so sometimes the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah, but a message of peace doesn't really benefit him personally in the moment. It's sort of a greater good of social injustice, because the problem is with people trying to retaliate for transgressions, it just war begets more war, right? And that's the violent cycle of aggression. But he would have to tame that within himself first, and then to advocate and speak outwardly about it. It would sort of be for the greater good, not to disregard the people that have been harmed or killed, but just to say to stop harm or killing from moving forward.
Yeah. And I think that it can be summed up as in like someone to look up to. These are just some, I know this is like, I got all this fancy wordage, but it's just someone we look up to. And why would they look up to them? Or because they did something brave in spite of their cowardice, or, we're all, no one's really brave in front of a artillery barrage, but, I can say a lot of us are cowards in front of that. They did something outside of the box, innovative. A lot of people look up to people like Edison or Tesla or something like that, because they were sitting there being creative. Inventors are very favorably looked upon in our society, and they did it. So there's also that element of action. They're not just talk. They're not just sitting there being like, well, here's what I believe. Well, okay, that's Martin Luther King was working towards that, but and he wasn't just all talk. But you get a lot of people who are just they think that all they have to do is say something, and therefore they're worthy of admiration. But that's not really how it works. Someone who goes all the way with what they are, someone to look up to. And so this ends up being very beneficial to our society. And I'm going to gloss over this quickly, and we'll get to this a little more later. Because what we do when we have these people to look up to, whether or not they're real, we have these people that set an example for our own action. So we have, let's name a couple, people who go off into no man's land to save their buddy. Well, that's an admirable trait. If I was there, I'd want to be that guy who would do that thing, because that seems like the right thing to do in that situation. Or I want to be the guy who doesn't, who stands up to Hitler's BS during the 1930s, damn the consequences. Or like leaves and then comes back and fights, or speaks up against, communist propaganda. This is the type of person you'd want to be. And so we see these people doing that. A lot of people saw the tyranny of the Romans, and then they looked to Jesus as a symbol of deliverance from that tyranny, or that sort of tyranny. So these examples of right action enhance our qualities of our own right action, and this is a very healthy use of it. This is it's an extremely healthy use of it. Okay, what would be the right thing to do? And when we use them, heroes, properly, they are great sources of inspiration, and they don't even have to be real. I keep using real-ish examples, but you know,
they're
you
more
have
relatable.
They're more relatable, kind of, but then you get someone like Luke Skywalker. Well, he's relatable because he's simple, and he's kind of a doofus, and then, you know, he kind of grows up and goes through the hero's journey, and then ends up being this better person and more well-rounded. It's like, oh, I need to go through my own path like that. So you get this example of not just action, but example of a good life and a right attitude.
But it's also a funny example because some could consider his actions like terrorism.
Yeah.
It's really apropos because that's what all heroes are like. Like, a lot of what they're fighting for isn't necessarily black and white, good or bad.
Yeah. Well, I think in our current state of cultural relativism, we can define anything as terrorism if we want, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Luke Skywalker was the good guy. I'm sorry, there's any other interpretation is just wrong. That's not how the movie was made. So I don't care what revisionist interpretation you have, he was the bad guy. But, and here's the big but, heroes do come with a bit of an aftertaste, and it can be summed up. Now, they are a bit dangerous. It can be summed up in a quote from Frank Herbert, who said, "I wrote the Dune series because I had this idea that charismatic leaders ought to come with a warning label on their forehead. May be dangerous to your health. One of the most dangerous presidents we had in this century was John Kennedy, because people said, 'Yes, sir, Mr. Charismatic Leader, what do we do next?' And we wound up in Vietnam. And I think probably the most valuable president of the century was Richard Nixon, because he taught us to distrust government, and he did it by example." So he wrote...
That's so deliciously cynical.
Oh, it is. But he wrote one of the better science fiction books of the 20th century. Don't take my word for it. Go read it. They're coming out with a movie soon. And
Another movie.
Well, probably a good movie. The one in the 80s was...
It was so good.
It was not.
That should be another episode on its own.
Oh, I
have Norm on to debate you with that.
Really? Okay, I'll have to actually watch the 80s movie because I know it's bad. I intentionally haven't watched it because I want to enjoy my life. And so essentially in Dune, if you haven't read it or watched it, go read it. There's noble houses vying for power. There's a great source of wealth on this one planet, and it gets given to these one people, and they're attacked and thrown out into the desert and sent into exile. And a kid, Paul, takes the reins of this nomadic group of freedom fighters called the Fremen. I don't know if they're freedom fighters, but they end up seeing Paul as the hero, the one that will save them and one that'll bring them out. And they start seeing him as a god, no more than a hero. And then this, beyond the will of the tyrant, moves them to cause unimaginable horrors on the universe. And so what Herbert's warning against is that dark side of the hero that we have. And a lot of it gets taken too far in our society, but it's still not a bad warning, because in reality, your hero is someone, like I said, to look up to. He's an example. But what the danger is that if you start treating him as a leader, then you end up being very much in trouble. We've seen this so much throughout even the 20th century history, but the feudal and pre-feudal societies were based on this too.
What's that, making leaders out of heroes, you mean?
Yeah. So instead of saying, okay, you're an example for me to emulate, you're saying, I'm going to give all my agency up to you, but then not you, because you can't control the agency of hundreds of thousands of people. You end up just becoming a name, and you lose the okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Essentially, what happens is the cult of personality comes in. Leader, let me just make a note. So the cult of personality becomes born around a person once everyone starts treating the hero or the leader, well, the heroic leader as, father or mother, something to guide them because they don't feel the need to guide themselves. Oh, I can't be a hero. Well, maybe not, but you can aspire, and that's enough. And I think we've said that on multiple occasions. It's like, you don't have to achieve greatness, but the act of pushing yourself towards greatness will enrich your life and make it.
And it is itself greatness. That push towards greatness, I think, is what makes great people great.
Yeah. And we all need to strive for it to some extent. And that means like stupid stuff like don't eat so much sugar, exercise as much as possible.
Say hi to your neighbors.
Yeah. Don't put up with crap, that kind of stuff. If someone's attacking you, don't start a fight, but always finish it. These kinds of things. Don't put off today. Don't put off till tomorrow what you can do today. These kinds of things. And they all sound like cliche, but when you put this discipline into your life towards some end of personal greatness in recognition of those who have already done so, or an example of them in fiction, then what we have is a whole bunch of people doing great in their own lives, and then society is better for it. But if you say, no, the leader will make me great, and this is the trap. It's an easy trap, and it seems stupid when I'm saying it because I'm saying it with this cynical, knowing air of a guy sitting in a democratic country who's used to his own freedom. Now, if you're in China right now, it's kind of second hat though, because you're saying, "Oh, great leader Mao Zedong. Oh, great leader Zhou Enlai. Oh, great leader Xi Jinping," and you push all your agency on to them because they're the leader. They have displayed these heroic qualities that you couldn't match because you've been convinced that you can't. You've been convinced that no matter how hard you try, the cult of personality says that this is the entity that needs to control your life, and you don't think that because one person can control 1.2 billion people or something, that's ludicrous, and that all the examples of that have tried in the past have failed to some extent. And this ends up being if I put my historian hat on, we can see that a lot of this is a very natural human tendency. This isn't just something that people are tricked into doing. This isn't a conspiracy. Well, sometimes it is a conspiracy, but you look at some of the first, a lot of the first forms of human society, where a lot of it was what we'd call big man politics. The biggest, most heroic man in the field of usually violence or hunting would be given more responsibility within the tribe. And this made sense for a tribe of 100, maybe a couple hundred people at most. Then this carried forward into when we started having cities, and they start propping people up as gods, and because simply for the fact that they're there, they become heroes because they are there at the top of the ziggurat. And the first societies to reject this, you see people like the Greeks and the Romans especially, where a hero is someone who steps down from that. You get the story of Cincinnatus, where Cincinnatus, we need you. All right, I take my dictatorial powers and I vanquish the enemy, and then I go back to farming. And this is the Cincinnatus, the Roman hero.
Oh, I never heard of him.
Okay, He is semi-mythical, I believe, but I think the fact, Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus. So he's, I just brought him up, legendary figure of Roman virtue, civic virtue, and because he was the one who had dictatorial powers over the entire Roman Republic. Roman Republic was led by two consuls, pretty much two presidents at the same time, which were chosen yearly. And then they presided over a Senate, and each consul had veto. But that Senate was could be vetoed by the tribunate, which was the representation of the masses, the plebs. So this man was given complete and utter control over the entire Roman system in an emergency, and everyone said, "Oh, is he going to give it up? Is he going to give it up?" And he gives it up to go farming. This is the Roman idea of virtue, which is a vastly different idea of any form of virtue that had come before. And so
who did he give it to? Just out of curiosity.
Who
did he give it to? Do you know?
Oh, he just gave it up and said, okay, whoever's next in line to be consul. So he was dictator. And so he said, all right, I'm stepping down as dictator. My 6 months as dictator are over. He's ruler of the entire thing. And he just stepped down, and the next consuls took charge.
That would blow my mind if I ever saw that. And if Putin just stepped down one day and said, like, hey, let's be a democracy.
Everyone would be like, Putin's awesome.
Yeah, then they'd want him back.
Yeah, they'd put a statue up to him and be like, no, I'm farming. Well, he'd probably farm bears or something. Yeah.
Throw them just to slay them with his hands.
Yeah.
Bare hands.
And then he'd be like, I eat them, you use all the bear. And then anyway.
Yeah. Sorry for the sidetrack. I just I'd never heard of the Cincius there, and I've never also heard of a dictator stepping down before, so it felt
it actually happened quite a bit in Roman history, because it was the idea of the hero. So you step up, and then you do your dictatorial thing, and then you step down.
Like you complete your duty and your service to the public, and then you step down.
Because they were saying, okay, every once in a while we're going to need one guy to take charge. So we can vote to have a dictator, and then he gives it up after 6 months. And we can actually vote to keep him on again if the war just takes forever. And so what happened was this happened, and it happened a couple more times over the course of the Roman Republic until Sulla took dictator for life and then stepped down like an absolute Chad. Because I'm retiring. It's like, geez. And then a couple
you're
years.
You're saying that would be less virtuous than stepping down for good measure?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sulla was not a good person. And then Caesar did the opposite, where he made himself dictator for life, which lasted 2 more years, at which point he was stabbed to death. So this became a trend. So it was bastardized, but this is this idea of this hero who is not just a tyrant, because Caesar and Sulla and later Augustus all wanted to become that. They set up that hero worship, that cult of personality that promised so much for the plebs and the glory of Rome, but in the end only brought them prescriptions, which were just literally lists of literally kill lists that Sulla would produce every day and say, here's the people I want killed today. Prescription. Here's prescribing the deaths of citizens. That's a tyrant. That's not someone who should be looked up to as a hero. But because of the cult of personality, they put all their love behind it, and it became the norm around 33 44 BC, and it stayed that way through kings and popes and all this thing up until 1776, when a bunch of guys got together and be like, okay, yeah, but what if no kings? And so then we start reinventing that non-martial heroic spirit, where we don't require our, we don't start putting our heroes up on pedestals. We start looking for heroes in other places, and you stop seeing heroes in story be just martial, and you start seeing heroes in story that are you start seeing scientists, you start seeing women acting heroically. I'm looking at any of the Bronte novels, or keep thinking of Jane Austen or something.
Or Emmy Noether for a little bit more modern time.
Yeah, and well, even in the modern time, it becomes, you start getting heroism in other fields like art, and invention becomes big, because invention, and then he invented penicillin and saved millions of lives. Or someone like Jon Snow, who figured out germ theory of disease. That's because he went out, did a bunch of science, and found out that, a baby pooped in the water table and it caused a cholera outbreak in London, and he just took the tap away all heroically, and so you can't drink from this water fountain was an act of heroism, because he sat there, did the science, and came back and said, this water supply is making you sick because someone's throwing diapers into the water table. And we get this idea, but we didn't put Jon Snow up on a pedestal and be like, run this, we need you to lead us into, that's not assumed anymore. The hero isn't someone who's being heroic so that they can become the big man in the tribe. The tribe's too big now for that. It doesn't matter anymore. Plus, in a democratic society, we know that's dumb. Someone who can bash in a tiger's skull with a stick, though impressive, is not worthy really to be prime minister, because that's not really what the job entails. Now, I might put him on my wrestling team. So, and because okay, your heroism tells me this, and but the heroism doesn't lie just in the action, it lies in what allows that action to happen. And this is why you can't follow them, because you have to use them as an example, which is the main point of this entire thing. Because what happens is you have these actions that people do, and the thing that brings them to the action, the steadiness of purpose, the focus. Okay, I have to be more focused, so I have to practice being focused. The diligence of practice, the discipline of study, all these things, the go get 'em attitude that Jon Snow observed when he's just like, people are dying, I need to go find the source of this cholera outbreak, and he just did it. To me, that's heroic. And so that's something to look up for, and that's something I want to emulate myself. There's something I need to do, I'm just going to go and do it. And I'm going to go sit, and someone sits there and does the math. It may not be cool in a movie, someone sitting there with a map going, where are the outbreaks? And he's just writing X's on a page. Doesn't look cool in a movie. What looks cool in a movie is Captain America throwing his shield into somebody's neck. I guess that's cool, but
I think for context too, just for the listeners who don't know, what he did was sort of map out all the wells in the city and saw where the contaminated areas were. And by drawing on the map where the contaminations and outbreaks were occurring from, that he sort of isolated the one fountain that was most root cause. I think it's something like that, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And he interviewed everyone in a radius of something, and then he found out what was happening, and he found the root cause.
But it was his science and deliberate methodical effort that made it possible, because everybody else just thought it was magic or spirits or bad luck or smitings from gods.
Yeah. They thought it was a miasma, literally just bad air.
Yeah.
Which sounds
good. No,
good.
it's the poop in the water. It's pretty much just the poop, not
which is the equivalent of, I guess, the new age stuff. People being like, "Oh, there's bad energies coming off of this thing. Oh, you have negative energy. Oh, there's so much negative energy in here." It's literally the same thing. And so what we have now, what I want to bring it to, though, is what happens when we put someone who says something like all our problems are caused by this one group of people, and we need to be more pure. And they have a neat message. Look at me. I'm just one of you, and I want to say that, we were brought down. We're actually the most noble people in the world. And so what we need to do is take our birthright and conquer those who are trying to conquer us. You have this heroic message. If you can't figure out who it is, it's Schmadolf Schmittler. And what happened is he became a hero to the people because he did that beer hall putsch where he marched on what do you call that, Munich, to take it over in the early 20s. It was like 23 or 22, I should know this, but and then was arrested and a couple of people died and it was kind of a bit of a riot. Then he went to jail and became a martyr and then wrote his famous book. His famously, it
should have just been called Trite.
Yeah.
The whole
it's definitely tripe. And but it's interesting in its as a primary source. But I still
to get into his mindset and everything too. Like, I'm so glad he did it, but like the fact that people still read it and follow it, it's just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. I think I still never read it. I don't want to. If I had an assignment that said read, chapter 3 of it, I read Stalin, which was also tripe. But the thing is that he became this hero, this person to emulate, or he made himself a person to emulate. Either way, much like actually Paul of Dune did. Paul of Dune, there was a made up prophecy and they're just like, yo, we can live if we follow the prophecy, saying that, yeah, we're totally the saviors that you're looking for. And everyone's like, whoa, they're totally the saviors you're looking for. And I'll just like Hitler was like, yeah, I'm the guy you're looking for. We'll lead the Aryan race into whatever. And then so when he says this, they put him on this pedestal and Hitler instantly loses all freedom. The hero you think has the reins of the state or the reins of history or the reins or whatever. But in reality, they can't control that. If you put your faith in the thing, the tides of, I don't want to say like that, the tides of history.
Fickle fingers.
Yeah. Essentially, you go with what the state wants to do as a group and you start moving towards. So what the masses think that the state should be doing is what the leader does. And so you are constrained in action because you have to do what the people think that the hero you would do and not the actual you would do. So a good example of this was Hitler liked Wagner's music. No one else liked Wagner's music in the Third Reich, only Hitler. And every time he tried to institute this, like this is my idea of what, Germany should become. And they're all like, sure. And he kept dragging all his like generals and politicians out saying they just hated it. They didn't get it. They didn't see what Hitler saw in it. But Hitler had this idea. So what Hitler wanted actually didn't really matter that much. And so his conception of it, but the group's conception of what Hitler wanted that group to do ruled and not Hitler himself. That's my argument, I guess.
So the persona had to embody the ideal and not the other way around. Right.
And so this is why you have Frank Herbert saying, they should come with a warning label because the hero that you have and put on side won't even be able to control the hero that he has become. And so this is a very rightful thing. And in modern times, not modern times, in the present, we see this now where we keep putting, every time there's an election, we keep treating our politicians like kings. So we like,
worse yet, they advertise themselves as the righteous heroes. That drives me absolutely berserk.
I'm gonna stop this guy. I'm gonna stop this guy. Look, like I'm surprised their ads don't have like caricatures of each other sword fighting in the arena. And
they do have caricatures, but just not literal ones. Like those ads are just insane. I
want to see like in the next one, like, I don't know, I guess it'll be Harris versus Trump, maybe. Sure, let's say that. And like the Democratic one will be like them both in gladiatorial gear and she just stabs him and goes, America. And it's just like, okay, this is not what America is. But
it'd be really funny if they did it in anime too. another country's.
Yeah, it's probably just
cartoon.
Unfortunately, it's just going to be some politically correct garbage. But what we're doing is we're making our democratically elected officials into hero figures and we're now expecting them to do heroic deeds because of this. So it's just like, look at me, I'm this, which is why I almost prefer Canadian politics, because most of the candidates will say stuff like, well, we need to sit down and actually do the paperwork and the budget, blah, 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 blah. And you get a couple who are like, Green New Deal. And so, which is a heroic deed in itself, although I don't think the ends justify the means. But
politics is a good spot for this, actually, because I just want to bring up like Arnold Schwarzenegger as a good example of this, because he played for over a decade, played heroes in movies, right? So he actually acted as a hero constantly for a living as a job. And then he became governor of California. And whatever you think of him, right or wrong, I think he was an excellent governor. Nobody's perfect, but he did a really good job. Despite his past history of like women abuse and being an arrogant, egotistical prick, he did do a lot of wrong, but as a politician, there were no qualms about him. He just spoke his mind, and you knew exactly where he was coming from, and he was looking out for the people's best interest because he had an acting career that was far more superlative to his political career, so he didn't really care what people thought of him by that point. I think it's a funny instance because he acted as a hero and then became a people's hero of some sorts on the left-leaning California side.
Yeah, and I think, well, the other example of this is on the right, although I don't think, what's his name, Ronald Reagan. But Ronald Reagan really was acting more the politician than the hero. That's debatable, but
he was a banker's hero, though.
Yeah,
people in finance believed Reagan was like the second coming of Christ.
Yeah, and then he moved during his reign, they moved all the manufacturing over to China.
Yeah,
although a lot of the weight of that can be placed on politics of the 70s and Henry Kissinger. And they couldn't have seen what the result of that was. But
even still, they benefited from it for like 3 decades. So it's not like it was a bad decision to do it in the first place. It's just how much they invested in outsourcing production and manufacturing. Like that reliance of the country, it wasn't really the intention from the get-go to do that. It was mostly just, hey, the cheap stuff, the quick stuff, the things that we don't want people here making because it's dirty and pollutes, like a bunch of plastic waste bins at dollar stores and things like that.
Yeah.
But what we did was just for profit. Absolutely everything was shipped overseas for manufacturing because it was just cheaper and we got rich faster. And it was just nearsightedness, which I think everybody does. And I'm not a lover of Reagan, but I wouldn't fault him for the economic decisions he made in outsourcing. I would more fault him on the economic decisions he made from trickle-down economics, believing that giving money by the boatload to a few people trickles down evenly to everyone else below. And the economic stratas, that's just insane.
Yeah. So I think getting back is that we expect them to do paperwork heroically, but we don't expect them to just solve all our problems. Because we're putting these people in a position to, in a democratic society, to administrate, not to rule. And we're expecting them to rule. And I think this is indicative of what's happening a lot in our society, is where we're looking towards someone like Superman, not as an example of how we should be acting, which is the point of Superman. It's like, just because you don't have powers doesn't mean you can't, exhibit the qualities of Superman. But if you start looking to Superman as a parent, oh, where's Superman when you need him? And then like saying, oh, how, and then you start saying stuff like, well, Superman wasn't there when I needed him and therefore he's evil. And it's like, well, he's not your parent. Yeah. He's doing what he can. Everyone's just doing what they can. And then when when our leaders, screw up because we expected them to reform the country in our image, not something that they would say, then we see they turn from heroes to devils. And this is a good sign that we are unhealthily casting people in the role of hero. And so I think what we need to do is to realize what a hero is. And I think a lot of it is that it is somewhat of a personal thing. And it's a bit transcendent. So, but the personal aspect is probably more important, because what a hero means to us is very important. So what it means to me as Jordan wouldn't mean the same thing to, say, Chris or anyone listening. And there are some universal heroes, but there are things that I find heroic, and there were characters that I thought were heroic because they spoke to what my interests were. We're all kind of a bit different. This is why we have that whole idea of diversity, which is not just racial. It's, I'm literally different than anyone else I know. And so my interests in media and in things like that are going to be different. And my ideas of a hero are going to be slightly different. This is why when you have an ensemble cast of something or whatever,
Justice League
or like something like Star Trek, everyone watches like Next Generation. We can all look up to Captain Picard, but some people might be like, yeah, but Data's my hero. Why? Well, because that's I think is more important to me than it would be to someone else. So that person might think that character is more important to them. And fair enough, because we're all interacting with our heroes as an individual. We're not interacting with them as a group. And when we interact with them as a group, it's more likely that, you're going to start carrying around little red books. And so this is why I say we should keep it to be personal and realize that we are interacting with our heroes as individuals. What does Superman mean to you? What does Captain America mean to you? What does Achilles mean to you? What are these characters? So interact with them, and you're going to have this own interpretation of these characters. And you can bring your interpretation to the table and tell us about it and say, this is how this character or these people or Winston Churchill has interacted with my own life. Now, the problem happens, and I'm going to get into a bit of my pet peeve, and I'm not
Well, before you get into that, let me just ask you then about what you just said.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt, but you're talking about like how people are, or how authors might produce a story to show that the conflict of thought in the hero's mind, right? And I think, and this is just speculation on my part, but the author's intention was probably to make the readers ruminate, whether it's a comic book or a movie or anything. They're intending that the people individually readjust and reassess their own values of virtue or their own ideas of heroism, right? That's sort of what the Batman character was all about, the Dark Knight, where is he good, is he bad? Well, he's mostly good, but he's not all good. And same with Peter Parker, how his affinity for his family, but he kept neglecting his family to help others and things like that. So I think the conflict of the hero in most of our stories is supposed to be pinned on that dilemma aspect of there not being a clear binary right and wrong option. It's the sort of churning through the process. But like how much of that is inspired by the stories themselves? Like when people see stories of heroes constantly, they're not really forced to come up with their own ideas or ideals. Do you know what I mean? So they're kind of constructed by the media itself, even though the media was probably well-intentioned in having people just sit and think about it. It might also be the case that these stories are what construct people's ideas of heroism to begin with, because there's just so many of them.
To me,
how does that play in?
A lot of what the media is doing now, like they're trying to shove ideas of heroism down my throat that don't make any sense to me. Mm-hmm. Like you get stuff where you have heroes being degraded, and then all of a sudden there's saying stuff like, oh, masculinity is bad, but then they have female characters of color instead showing the same masculine heroism. And I'm just kind of like, okay, I don't know what you're trying to get at me. And I think a lot of it is not particular. Like, I don't think it's purely culturally constructed, as in an answer to your question there is, I think a lot of it is, some of it makes sense. And this comes down to, I think, something I was going to get to. Oh, that's a good time to get to it. Is that it does have to conform to the logos to some extent. And that is the way that we live in reality, rather than our subjective. So the logos, I guess, is the interaction between our subjective reality and objective reality. And when they align, we have a good time. And when they don't, we turn into cowards or just evil tyrants, or just,
we're so insecure we start wars.
Yeah, or we, on the personal level, we just get depressed. So the logos is the way, and following the logos and knowing the logos can be considered something like the Tao. So essentially live in tune and in harmony with reality, because reality exists. Whether or not it's an illusion, okay, that's another thing, doesn't matter. Whether or not it's culturally constructed, well, it's not, because we're living in it. And I can't turn into a bird when I want to fly, which would be awesome. And I've tried. And it doesn't work. So we have these conceptions of heroes, and they do, maybe in a Joseph Campbell sort of sense, we have a hero with 1,000 faces, and they're somewhat culturally constructed, and they're somewhat like historically constructed, and they're informed a lot by biology and the nature of our evolutionary past. What does it mean to be good in our society, but also what does it mean to be good and have right action within reality? Because, sandbagging, you have to fight against the tides of the flood, which, like we talked about last week. And so when people try and construct a hero intentionally, a lot of times it comes across as just terrible propaganda. And we saw this in Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, where they come up with like, this is the ideal man and woman, and it's just like, it's goofy, it's so stupid. Here's someone who loves the Soviet Union, and they're like, I love the Soviet Union. It's like, that wasn't forced at all. It's like someone who's just blindly loving leader is the greatest heroism. We're like, no. Like,
watch those Xi Jinping assemblies.
Oh, right.
Every time he stands up in front of all of his constituent government leaderships or whatever, everybody like does that vigorous little clap thing.
Yeah.
North Korea's got the same thing.
Yeah. And
they show like those hysterical, they're falling over and fawning all over him as he parades through town on a giant rocket shaped like a cock.
Or like, in North Korea, where they absolutely have this hero complex over a great leader, and they think that this 14
is 14 hole-in-ones in one round of golf.
Yeah. And then he's not, but then they're all starving, and he's like always so heroic because he's fighting against the evil America, and all these evil democratic powers who are so very evil. It's just like
Japan and South Korea, those evil people.
Yeah. Now, K-pop is a bit sketchy. It's definitely something that came directly from the underworld, but doesn't mean South Koreans are evil.
We can pin that on Dance Dance Revolution. That's what started that all.
Yeah. DDR is the undoing of our entire society.
And the pinnacle of my childhood. But anyway,
that's going to be on like when I get brought up by the Politburo in the future. That's going to be on this. Like, he said this about DDR. How dare he? I'll get my trial. And so
the prison camps.
Dance. So what was I saying?
Sorry.
So
you were talking about the celebrated leaders who are being
right. So when we try and create them, it ends up being not in tune with reality, and then we end up pushing ourselves into disaster. And a lot of us know when something, like, if we're honest with ourselves, we know when something is actually heroic to us, and when it's just kind of when it's kind of something that we want to go along with. Now, not everyone has this self-awareness, but generally, if you try and make someone who shells peanuts for a living, put them in the same class as I don't know, like Superman or something, I'm going to be like, no. Well, these things are obviously different, and we try and make heroes of things every day, of the mundane, as we're trying to celebrate mediocrity in our society to some extent, which is extremely harmful because, well, that's another story. But we do have a sense, I would say that we do have an innate sense on what actually is heroic. And it does change from person to person, but it aligns with it. So no matter how much the media tries to tell me that someone like Greta Thunberg is a hero, I'm never going to believe it because, well, one, she's not practicing what she's preaching, and the other is she's not saying anything and she hasn't done her homework. You know, a hero to me is someone who's done all their work and can come up with something that actually is an actionable plan without using any pleas for emotion. This is not heroic. And just because someone talks in front of the UN doesn't mean they're worth listening to, because lots of people not worth listening to have spoken in front of the UN. And so what we have as a hero becomes, and this is why, and this kind of leads me into what I was going to get to, is that a lot of these people are pushing for these new types of heroes in the media are trying to degrade our other heroes. So I haven't really made a distinction between fictional heroes and factual heroes. Now, a fictional hero, you can't quite rule over you. Okay, everyone's saying, well, what about Jesus? But a factual hero right now we're seeing within these factual heroes, you know, people like in Britain will look up to someone like Winston Churchill. Now, Winston Churchill was an ass at the best of times. You don't even need to call him racist. Like, he was a jerk, but he was a jerk that got stuff done. He's a jerk that made it so that the Americans won the Allies won the war. And so, he was what they needed. And once the war ended, he's like ran for prime minister again. And they're like, no,
no, time and place.
Yeah. And so they knew that, you know, their hero, their leader was a specific type of hero. And so, you know, people voted him out. Good for you, Britain. Although they voted him.
Important to underline too, though, that the situation plays a huge role in the whole process of identifying and speaking of heroes and heroism in general, right? Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, shelling nuts compared to Superman. Well, if they're shelling nuts for a group of paraplegics who can't shell their own nuts, yeah, and that person is living this modest and really simple life, and they're sacrificing any greatness in their own lives so that they can just provide peanuts to people who have no hands. I mean, that could be heroic based on that situation and that circumstance. But once that village is gone of the paraplegics, shelling nuts for strangers probably isn't very helpful, or it might still be noble, though. And that's the thing. Like, there's a difference in our minds between the ideas of nobility, not like, monarchical nobility.
Yeah.
The virtue Platonic nobility.
Well,
there's a difference in that based on a situation. Like, there's a huge factor
and
of situation involved.
People who display nobility are important. And I think nobility is getting a short shrift. It's like, why would a gentleman is just a racist figure? It's like, no, a gentleman is someone who cultivates nobility. In our society, you don't need to be an aristocrat to cultivate nobility.
Yeah, but now it's like half deemed sexist to open a door for a woman. It's not even gentlemanly. Like, I was taught by women to do that, and now I'm offensive when I do it. Like, it's all situational and time dependent, which makes it kind of arbitrary in my mind. Like, we just come up with ideas of what's noblesse and how we should behave toward it. But greatness isn't some Like you mentioned the logos, and that should be fact, logical, reality-based understanding. But there is no logos in a heroism that changes based on the time and place.
Well, to some extent, but all heroism is that. So you have someone who wins a gold medal, and this is kind of one of the tragedies of it. And one of the problems with heroes in reality, you win a gold medal, and then after that, the game's over. You have to go home. You move on with your life. You're never going to the Olympics again. And you need to find a new form of heroism. You can ride on the coattails of that heroism for a while, but not too long a while. You have to move on with your life. That heroism that you displayed in all of that effort is realized, and then you have to live the rest of your life. It's like, well, what now? So you get like those stories of like people who can't handle it, or you get those stories of people that overcome it and say, okay, time to coach, time to bring up the next round of heroes, of people who are going to push themselves to the limit and do this and reach their physical pinnacle. And now my physical pinnacle is past, and now I'm going to move on to a nurturing, a different form of heroism. And so it switches, it's time and place. But the problem I have is that when people say, well, your hero was actually racist, and you see this nowadays so much to an unbelievable degree, where it's like, okay, we can't look up to people like Jane Austen, great writer, fight me, because she was British, and the British used bought tea, and the tea is racist. So now the Jane Austen Museum has to have a little plaque. I am not making this up, where they say
pull
like
out the rest of my hair for that.
Yeah. And so now, someone who wrote something so well who had nothing to do with the imperial. Well, she did is tangential. Even if she the fact that she wasn't calling it out means that she was things like, oh, thanks, Ibram X. Kendi, you're unnecessary. Would you please leave? But all your heroes are racist is this new thing, or all your heroes are sexist, or it's toxic masculinity, or this or that or that, the other. And that's not the point of a hero. And so, yes, all of the heroes that I have from history went poop. And this is kind of the thing. They're not perfect. No, they're people. But we can look up to someone like Luke Skywalker. Well, you can't look up to him because he's white. Okay, we can look up to someone like
Jamal Khashoggi.
I have no idea who that is.
The Wall Street, what was it? Wall Street Journal? Yeah, the Wall Street Journal author who was assassinated by the Saudi government in Turkey, in the embassy.
Okay.
Dismembered, cut into pieces.
Yeah, I don't remember that one.
Oh, okay. Never mind then.
But what I was talking about was like, we can look up to fictional ones. I don't know, like, in my youth, one of my heroes that I definitely emulated quite a bit, or tried to, was Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek. Well, because it was a thing that was on. My father would watch it with me when I was with him. And I watch it, and this hero, this person, this exemplar of right action, sitting there being like, I will use my mind to solve problems. Look at me, I know literature and science, and I have curiosity and a will to go forward, and I'm not, meek. And so you have this idea, and he's almost this ideal, and he's not perfect because, they make him make mistakes. But the thing is he's still limited by a narrative. And so the narrative, you have this example of what an ideal person in our society should be. And then you have them in real life, and they're like, oh, well, they go to the washroom. You never see your heroes on TV go to the washroom. You never see your heroes on TV stumble on words. You never see your heroes on TV, make a social faux pas, because well, they're part of the story, and it would take away, and we only have 20 minutes to get to the end of the story. But in reality, you have people in reality making bad decisions. But in a story, you can have your characters and your examples and your heroes be a certain way. In reality, I would say you have to temper it with the fact that you shouldn't just follow them blindly. But the fact that someone overcomes all their foibles and faux pas and all of that baggage that comes just with being human, literally being tired and having to act while you're exhausted, be presentable with, without sleep for 48 hours. Tell me how heroic that feels if you can still pull off that speech. I feel pretty heroic sometimes for working through this myocarditis, although I would find it weird if someone actually looked up to me for it. But it feels that way, right? It feels a bit heroic. And I'd like to look to, and it's neat that I can look to myself. I did right action in that moment. I want to be like I was there. And I can look to myself at certain points in my time and be like, and we say this all the time, I did this once, I can do it again. And so we can become the heroes in our own story. And what I'm saying is, it's not the person that you look towards, it's the qualities of that person. Now, to be fair, some of our heroes did turn out to be irredeemable. O.J. Simpson, Bill Cosby, Andrew Cuomo. Ugh.
But people were hailing him as a hero. Like, he got an Emmy for walking people through a pandemic crisis.
We wrote a book and they gave him an award for it. Yeah. But the pandemic wasn't over and he hadn't actually finished.
And they found out all the abuse that he was causing in the background.
Talk about putting the cart before the horse. Yeah.
But he was deemed a hero, though. That's sort of the thing.
Yeah. And now nobody's talking about him because he doesn't fit what narrative everyone's trying to put up, that media narrative that I was talking about. He doesn't, oh no, we had him as a hero, oh no, but showing that would show the errors in our hero creation system. It's like, well, they're pretty blatant. And I think that's worth talking about. But we can see that these examples of right action in history, now, one way of doing this is, waiting for the whole story to come out. You get someone like, you could look up to someone like Solzhenitsyn, who made it through the Gulag, wrote all those books, and the way he wrote those books was heroic. He memorized them by using a mnemonic device that took a lot of patience, although what else are you going to do in a prison camp? And so, but then in the 80s, he started writing about being
changing people's minds. Why is that so terrible?
Well, it's
in light of new information, we should just be open to the fact that our heroes might not be what we expected of them, and then be like, oh, we were wrong.
Right.
Why can't we do that without it being like, oh, we have to hide the fact that we were hailing them as heroes for all this time and pretend they never existed and pretend we never said anything good about them? Like, I think it should be okay for us to be wrong, no?
Because it's not, because at that point, the people saying that don't care about the individual. They don't say, oh, we learned a lesson. It's like, no, this doesn't fit the message. It's about the greater good. It's about the collective necessity of that group within society that needs to have that hero be pristine.
Like, based on that, I might conjecture it's our own fault of pigeonholing our heroes. Like, it's because we choose to perceive them as their perfect ideals that when we're faced with that being wrong, it's like a cognitive dissonance thing and we freak out. We could just look at heroes differently, like less specifically and directly and, precise. Instead of assuming that they're all of everything, they could just say their act was heroic. Their deed was heroic.
Yeah. And
their intention was heroic, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think this is tried, but I think they failed in recent history, especially in the movies where we're starting to get a lot of anti-heroes, which is kind of annoying. Like you mentioned Batman, which was kind of the first one. It was like, oh, it's neat. He's so gritty. And now all the heroes are just drunk. Oh, everything sucks. Like, I hate doing this. Why do I keep in every hero has to be this damaged individual now? Me and my wife
postmodernism infecting everything.
Yeah. And like me and my wife just watched all the old Bond movies because we just needed something to eat while we watch while we eat or something. So we're like, oh, let's watch these. And the old ones are fun. There's a few things in them that would, make a couple people these days blush, but I think we're getting a bit more for some reason, I think we're getting a bit more huffy stuffy. You know, the Victorians might be like, you guys are stuck up.
Yeah. and that says a lot coming from the Brits.
Yeah. And so what we're watching is like, these movies are fun. And the hero isn't perfect. You know, he gets up to all stuff, but he always wins in the end. But now we have to say, okay, James Bond has psychological conditions from his PTSD because he's constantly in violence and he can't handle it and blah, blah,
he's
blah,
not
blah.
showing up to his anger management issue.
Right. He's got to go to anger management class in the first place, even though he was doing things to protect the world from like radiation poisoning or some convoluted plot involving a virus or
and the world exploding from it,
lasers taking out cities. Like, I wouldn't really probably feel bad about like, oh, I shot a bunch of guys, but they were going to destroy like a continent, so I really don't feel bad about it. It's like, but you were in danger. It's like, yeah, and it sucked, but now 50 million people are alive, so I'm going to go voting. Like, but no, James Bond has to be damaged, and all the like Batman now kills people. Superman doesn't know what to do. And he's being, you know, it's all our heroes. Now we're showing them to have flaws. Yes. Which is smart because, you know, heroes are supposed to reflect reality. You know, fictional heroes are supposed to reflect reality. Like Luke Skywalker was great, but he was an ideal hero. Although not at first. He was kind of this bumpkin kid who actually, now that I think about it more, Luke Skywalker is a perfect example of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
He's this dumb kid in this bumpkin town who just wants to tinker with his little flying machine and doesn't want to go off and do anything, although he thinks that the rebels are cool and the Empire is bad, and he wants to, well, wouldn't it be cool if I was just out there going pew, 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 pew. Then he faces the reality of it. His mentor dies and he's just like, what do I do? What do I do? And he has to come to terms with it, and he overcomes it. And the heroism of Luke Skywalker isn't in the fact that he can use a lightsaber really well. It's in the fact in how he learned to use the lightsaber really. He overcame all this juvenile BS, and which actually was fun to watch, which is why it's a good movie. And then he slowly became this character that has it together. And well, we don't all have to fight a big empire, but you know, you do have to start a job and get good and disregard all your previous BS and learn how to interact with the system that you are piloting.
And that's sort of the appeal of origin stories. That's why we all, you know, all these hero, like even like Bruce Willis and Die Hard, and every time we have heroes, we have like origin stories of their upcoming and their failings and how they've matured and grown into their
something like Dickens in David Copperfield or Great Expectations. You have these Bildungsroman, which is German for like growing up story, where these kids who are dumb kids slowly become more mature, and then, you know, at the end of the book they're like, I am a fully functioning gentleman, and it's just like, nice. And so these are hero stories for younger people, but they're also hero stories for us. Like adults still read David Copperfield because it's, you know, the lessons that David Copperfield's learning are still lessons that we can learn today. The lessons that Pip learned can still be learned by, you know, people when they're older, just because it happens to a kid. But where was I going with that? I lost my train of thought.
Sorry. I guess sort of what I was bringing up, though, is just how much the influence of situation predominates the actual perception of a hero. You know what I mean? Like, one is actually contingent on the other. Batman without crime would have nothing to show off his heroism. He would just be a rich billionaire in a suit running around town like it's Halloween.
Well, if there was little crime in Gotham, then he has all that technology, and he can use his deductive powers on less, I guess, contraceptive.
He'd be like an insurance agent.
Well,
so
he could be a scientist.
Claim, he could investigate.
Batman could use all his, like, he could come in, research something, and like leave, and then go like rock climbing or something. He like Batman put to peaceful use would be a force of science. Like, he's got that giant laboratory. Like, look, his deductive powers are mixed with his like money and gadgetry. Could you imagine if he built his own like research lab? That'd be insane. And then he'd go do some like paragliding or something after work. Like, or
well, the Wayne Foundation did a whole bunch of like benevolent work and stuff, so it's not like he didn't do it on the side. But I mean, he could have focused on it. He spent an inordinate amount of money just on suits and gadgets and stuff.
Right. But the other thing is that if you're now, here's the other side of that, I guess, going with the Logos argument, I will speak because I'm Yoda, apparently, is that if Bruce Wayne, now this is getting to be weird conversation, if Bruce Wayne wasn't Batman, now we all have crime inherent to our system. To some extent, there are always going to be people making like, what if I can get around this and do some crime instead of actually doing some work? Yeah. So I don't know why I made him Italian.
Writing down a law is that people are going to bend it.
Yeah. And so what happens is Batman, the archetype, but if Batman, the person, and Bruce Wayne or whatever, him following his logos is being Batman. And so that is what that guy does. And for him to not follow that would probably make him, actually bring him to be that drinking loser that all our heroes are supposed to be nowadays. Everything's got to be dark and gritty. Unless you're a woman, then you get to tell everyone what to do. Man, the new Star Trek is terrible.
Sorry, I never got into it. Deep Space Nine I powered through, but couldn't do the rest of the Star Trek.
Yeah. Next Generation there was some really, really profound stuff in Next Generation. There was also some really bad camp, but I grew up with it. That was what, and I think to some extent, heroism in my own life was informed more from these heroes of, I guess this is where that media part comes in, is the heroes of media that were portrayed in media definitely had an influence on me, but I spent a lot of time thinking about what they meant to me. So heroes in shows like Star Trek and Babylon 5 resonated with me. Now, it doesn't because they're imposing their beliefs on me. It's like, no, I could have found them elsewhere, but those were the heroes that spoke to me. These were the ones that said, this is the lesson that resonates with whoever Jordan is. And I think it's a bit of an accident, and it's a bit of a cultural culture defining itself on me. But a lot of it is that is the type that I would have gravitated to because of who I was. And so the hero that thought things through, the hero that uses his brain as well as their brawn, the hero that is a bit of a polymath. These were people that I was just like, that is so cool. He could quote Shakespeare and shoot people. Oh, that's so cool. And when I was a kid, I was just like, that is the coolest thing ever.
And now you do it.
Oh, now I do it. Because when I was a kid, I was like, they're sitting around quoting Shakespeare. And I'm just like, that is some highbrow stuff. And they're like sitting there like poetry and all this stuff, but then they'll turn around and be like, let's sit down and do some astrophysics. And I was like, how do they do that? How does someone know that much? How does someone be able to switch gears like that? I thought, you're only able to do a couple things because I was a kid. I was limited. I could see what I was capable of, and I would see what these characters are capable of. And now I'm seeing like, okay, so now I can quote Shakespeare. I can shoot, I can garden, I can do all this stuff. And, my wife's no different. She's a musician. She does genetics. She's in pharmacy and a couple other things. And this is what I expected of heroes in my life. People who can engage in more than one thing in their life. But at the same time, that resonated with me. Other stuff's going to resonate with other people. And this is why when we're talking to other people, we'll say, oh, I think this character's so cool. And someone else will be like, I don't get it. They don't get it. That's cool. They probably have something that really resonates with them. And that's why in society, we have more than one hero. Not everyone's going to like James Bond. well, James
and
Bond
everybody had a different favorite Power Ranger.
Oh yeah, definitely. Or which is why when Marvel comes up with well, the Marvel movies are getting bad. I'm looking at you. What is it? I can't remember what it was. But you had these different aspects of personality within the Marvel universe. You had like Iron Man, who's just this patriotic, right, meaning he's got that what America sees itself, and that's good. And then you have the woman, which they did make kind of token, which was actually poorly done in my opinion, because she wasn't likable. If she was a guy, she wouldn't be likable. You have the angry guy, but who's soft on the inside. There's a lot of resonation there. You have the inventor dude, the rich billionaire guy who's got to overcome. Like, these are all stories and archetypes that resonate with us. And in order to, get the biggest audience, they just stick an ensemble cast together, and somebody will like someone best. So there's all hero there for everybody. But what a lot of the postmodernists don't realize is that it works because these qualities are present in all of us, and they are archetypal in sort of the Jungian sense.
Yeah, they manifest in different ways, but they convolve towards one central theme kind of thing, right?
Right. So to say that, we'll just invent a new hero, that's ridiculous. You can't just invent a new hero. Humans have these. And to make a new hero up is also dangerous, because what are the premises that hero is based on? And like the Aryan warrior. Well, that death worship in the Third Reich led to some pretty gosh darn distasteful things. And heroism of the proletariat, though, work and hard work are things worth seeing as heroic deeds, seeing anything other than that one quality led to some other gosh darn distasteful things. And so we have to see that heroism is not just this one single faceted thing. You can't just say, well, this is only this or this is only this. Because again, you can lead back into Herbert's nightmare, where you have the cult of personality being built built around it.
But you can build a new hero out of the same building blocks that pre-exist, right? Like, you're not saying you can't draw and name a new design of a hero. It's just that the pieces already exist for you to add together to make up this new character.
Well, look at the quality of our heroes over the past 500 years. You get someone like Roland in the Song of Roland, who's just like, I've got a sword and I've got a horse, I'm going to kill the dragon. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. It's literally just a knightly story.
And save the maidens fair.
Yeah, essentially. And he's a hero, he's someone to look up for, and he loves Jesus, blah, 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 blah. And then you get like Cervantes making fun of them in Don Quixote, which was actually kind of funny. And heroism changes, someone makes fun of it. Okay, we have to make new heroes. And so what happens is we've got these very, very complicated heroes nowadays. Heroes they're not one-dimensional caricatures of, heroism or something. They go out and they have to deal with life as we see it, because we're more complicated now than we were before. And so our heroes do keep evolving. There's still the same building blocks there, and there's still the same rules, which, abide by the logos, but the rules aren't there to restrain you. There's still infinite possibilities within those rules that we've set out with all the building blocks. It's just these archetypes can be played with infinitely, and a lot of them do it well. What happens if you put your hero who seems to be good in a situation that breaks them a bit? Oh, how did they deal with that? Let's push our hero to the limit. Let's see what they're capable of. And you can do that in a story. You can't do that with a hero in reality. We're already dealing with that stuff because,
politics.
Well, politics. But at the same time, you have someone who's a hero, and they're a hero sometimes because they had to deal with something unexpected, something that we didn't see, something that made a good story. And all of a sudden you have, these people come to the forefront, and we tell stories about them because it is a evolution or something new and nuanced. Now you have something like where we try and have the hero be a hero for different reasons. Now we have heroes who are dealing with internal strife, different types of conflict we're throwing at them. We're throwing different types of story at them. And
can I throw an example in there?
This is kind of what art does. Yeah.
Cartoons I thought were really good for that. When I was growing up, my heroes were cartoons. So like Animaniacs, Looney Tunes, Rocky and Bullwinkle, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think what's really interesting about cartoon heroes is that they're intentionally those exaggerated caricatures of heroism, right? They're not as good as they're supposed to be. They're not as bad as they're supposed to be. You know what I mean? Like they're just over the top with everything. And it just sort of it's a more articulate way of expressing through action, because you can act and then you can try and act real, but then you can act over the top like a cartoon with a giant mallet and a piano dropping on the bad guy's head, or Rocky and Bullwinkle running around from the infamous Russians who are out to get everybody. You know what I mean? Like the humor in it is sort of, to me, underlining that, hey, these ideas are good and they're helpful and they're productive to have, and you should try to aspire towards heroism, but they're a joke. Like, don't take them so seriously, like, I'm going to jump in front of a train because Jesus is going to save me. Like, don't take it literally. They're jokes. And I think cartoons are really good at framing that just based on the medium that they're being portrayed. What do you think about like caricatures, like actual caricatures of heroism?
I think it depends on whether or not they're trying to be ironic. Because there was no, like with something like Rocky and Bullwinkle, which is, there was no doubt as to who was in the right at any point in that. So the Russians were sitting there with their scheming plans and they were great. But Rocky and Bullwinkle ended out on top because they were right. And even though there was a caricature of it, the morality was still there. It wasn't some ironic or cynical piece that, it's like, oh, well, morality doesn't exist, so let's just, not care about anything, like a lot of the media actually since then has been. One that I think that we both watched, if I think about like animation and more moral heroes, was Kenshin, who definitely had some PTSD, but he was definitely dealing with his, he was a guy who definitely wasn't a hero previously and had figured out what right action was. But the show didn't always take him seriously. It hit him on the head with a rutabaga and it make him fall down. He gets smacked
by a little kid and get knocked over, even though he could beat up like huge demons and slay armies by himself.
Yeah, and Kenshin was a great example of heroism. Gentle with children, a man of restrained power, and he cared for his friends, and not everything was unidimensional, but at the same time, he was a nuanced hero, even though it's just a Shonen Jump thing, was that he was a nuanced hero because when he was fighting, he was discussing what it meant to be fighting the entire time. He wasn't just fighting because I need to fight. He's fighting because they were constantly having a discussion, like, is it right to fight?
And he wants it to stop. He was fighting to like protect people and to prevent further fighting.
And I think that was actually a very good take on heroism, because Kenshin was this lovable guy who, when the rubber hit the road, his eyes would change and you'd be like, oh, I screwed up. But if you weren't
with like Boris and Natasha, even they were funny in Rocky and Bullwinkle. So it wasn't just like all they said was demonic things and they were
it wasn't propaganda. Well, it was a bit propaganda, but the Russians had been the bad guys for like 40, 50 years at that point. And so like to have them speak Russian, like nobody needed to be like, oh yeah, BT dubs, the Russian are the bad guys. It's like, yeah, we know, duh. Yeah. Like, so they just made them Russian.
It was during a Cold War era, right? Like, or even shortly after, like it was around the whole Soviet thing when everybody for decades had been just pummeled with Russia, they're out to get you and you gotta duck and cover. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was showing the light and the humanity of even the bad guys. And they do that a lot in cartoons.
To make them how do we make them seem bad? Well, just give them a Russian accent. Okay, good. Like it's just easier. So you don't have to go be like, oh, by the way, we're bad. And so,
but even in things like Tom and Jerry, it's a cat and a mouse. They're born that way. So they're fighting because it's innate to their species or whatever. Like they're engendered by it. Same with, what's it called? Tweety Bird and
the Looney Tunes stuff.
Sylvester, yeah. It wasn't because Sylvester was evil. It's because he's a cat. So like they show these nuances even between good and bad. In the process of the caricatures. And I don't think they do that very well in movies because what they're trying to drive home is that effect.
Yeah.
Like when you mass slaughter a whole bunch of stormtroopers, you never see their faces. They're just not real people until you actually see one's face and then they're real people.
That was a funny thing about those new Star Wars movies was they're like, it's okay to slaughter all these guys and then they make it the story makes it's like, oh, by the way, I was taken away as a child and brought into the Empire. It's like, oh, wait, these nameless stormtroopers are child soldiers. What the heck?
Yeah. Like, suddenly there's a relationship to South Sudan, and you're like, oh shit, this is like, whoa.
But then we're supposed to cheer for you just slaughtering them. It's like, no, like.
But again, it doesn't make it okay for the stormtroopers to go and rip other people from their home to make them into stormtroopers, right?
Right, but that makes
not like they're not evil.
Like that makes, and then you have like the main characters, and this is why I couldn't buy any of the. That's why I wasn't like buying any of the new heroism of the new main characters, is because they're just like gleefully killing these people. There's no nuance to it. There was no nuance to the old Star Wars movies, but because they were literally Nazis, it's like, but now they're Nazis, but all of a sudden now you're killing people who are indentured. It's like, maybe if you're gonna put that nuance in, maybe you should maybe you should put some nuance into the problem solving too, instead of just like, oh well, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, blank. And so,
or show some remorse. Be like, I just killed 5 people to get away. I mean, I wasn't supposed to be in prison, but did these 5 people deserve to die over my escape?
Well,
think about it.
This is one of the problems I have with the movies that are being made now, is that you can make a bad movie as long as it toes some ironic propaganda of some sort or problematizes something. And I think what's missing in a lot of these is like we've explored heroism and we kind of made it gritty for a while, but I think to explore heroism again without just politics is what we need, because right action is right action. It doesn't matter who you are. And I think,
but there are spectrums of right action is sort of what I'm getting at.
Well, showed up to work on time and don't kill innocent children.
Well, in order to feed the people.
In the same camp, I guess, but
in order to feed the people, right, you have to take from the productive labor of a farmer. Mm-hmm. At some point, it has to come to that. And that farmer could have been richer if he had let market forces dictate the prices of his commodities.
Yeah.
Instead of making everything so expensive that the farmer gets ludicrously rich off it, you take from the farmer to feed all the people. So it's virtuous and good to feed your people as a king or whatever, as the hero king. Mm-hmm. But you're still hurting somebody, and that should be looked at. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong or whatever, but any action you take has to have some kind of balance to it. There's going to be a causative effect that hurts somebody else in the process.
Well, I think there's
what the hero's trying to do though is create more good than bad.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of media does deal with that. That says, okay, the hero. Well, I guess you're talking in a very utilitarian sense that like the hero should be doing the thing that creates the most good, but at some point, you might end up hurting people unintentionally. Now, again, the road to hell again is paved with good intentions. I intend to do good. So what intentions are the ones that won't do good? And this is, I guess, we're going to get into morality and a thing, and I don't think we have enough time for that, the rest. So I do want to stay on track, but I think that
the Crusades were well intentioned. That's my point. That's the problem with a lot of things.
Yeah, and I think that if we explore it, then we'll come up with these answers. And I'm unwilling to come up with a thing, because I'm saying not that like, well, here's what we should be seeing in movies. It's like, no, artists making movies should come up with this on their own. I'm not going to sit here being like, here's a list, guys, do this, because that's exactly the wrong thing.
Don't do that formula, do my formula. It's formula.
Because they're the ones writing books. They're the ones writing stories. They're the ones doing this. And I'm saying all that, don't give heroism and heroes short shrift. You need a hero in a book. Like, try writing a book without a hero. It's going to be a boring book. We have those. They're called textbooks. And like, people don't
textbooks.
yeah. But
pragmatic. That's
okay. I keep history books in my bathroom as bathroom. but
that's a true Reader's Digest.
Yes. Oh, jeez. All right. So I think just
for our young listeners, Reader's Digest is a tiny little booklet that everybody had in their bathrooms in the 90s.
Yes, your grandparents still have them.
Millennials probably don't know anything about Reader's Digest.
I think I'm a millennial. Anyway, I think to wrap up a bit, I'll say that the thing that we need to do is just not make we have to resist the urge to put our heroes above us, and we have to rather use them as an example to raise ourselves. And the result of putting them above us is these cults of personalities, where we end up lifting the hero and transforming them into a tyrant. And we have to bring these into ourselves. Superman is an ideal. He's not your parent. He's something that you can look up to. He's not something that you wish could be there in case, to keep you from having to do the work that you need to do in your own life. So to that end, I'd say, don't make your democratically elected official a hero figure. And they're there to do a job and not perform miracles for you. You need to perform miracles in your own life, which is why you need to be the hero of your own story. And this is why we look up the heroes, because we are the heroes of our own story. And we need to find out what that means. And by finding out what that means, we read history, we read literature, we imagine, we daydream, we create heroes. We do this constantly because we are the heroes. And we need to know what that means. And so to do that, we need to examine heroes and not just call them racist because they have, certain pigments of skin color. And so, that's pretty much my position.
I think what I'd like to mention, just further to that note, I agree with what you say there, and I'm going to try not to step on your toes and say the same thing twice, but I think what's really important to me that stands out is also that we don't take for granted that the decisions or ideas of what we believe are good are just because we believe them. I think all of our ideas deserve scrutiny, not just the ones you don't like so you can pick them apart and criticize them. We should be criticizing our own ideas of heroism and the people we look up to, and we should honestly and objectively, not subjectively, but objectively analyze deeds and see even the good ones have consequences and effects that are unintended or collateral damage. And things like, if you save some money for your tax base by selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, if they then, invade Yemen and commit atrocities there, you're participant to that. The tax money you saved directly was a result of receiving income from a government that then perpetrated atrocities. Mm-hmm. So the extension also matters. Even though the good deed of sparing your own citizens' money is there, the well-intentioned deed of a tax relief, or relieving a burden, is there. The harm it can cause, just by extension down the road, to something completely irrelevant and unrelated to the thing that you're doing, the deed, the good deed that you're committing. I think it's just really important to consider, not to say we're all at fault and we should all feel guilty constantly. And I'm not to say that, we should all be apologists and, forgive terrorists for committing acts of terror, but realizing that terrorists are human beings who have gone through shit and who have endured. That affects the way that you then respond and deal with those situations more coherently. And I think in talking about heroes, we could probably do a follow-up episode on evil.
We could, because
villainry
heroes
is prevalent too.
Well, villainry, I would definitely think, I used to say, well, there's no such thing as evil. And just and I have a lot of, some of my students definitely say stuff like, well, it's just someone's perspective. And I'm like, dude, we're talking about the Confederacy here. I'm pretty satisfied by calling them not good. Or when I'll be, what was I talking about recently? I think I was talking about the Germans in World War II, and I was like, I'm pretty happy saying that they were villains.
But it's important to remember that even people who supported the Nazi Party didn't necessarily support the concentration camps and, killing mentally challenged people or gay people, or it doesn't mean that they agreed with everything. It was just, well, I'll get shot if I don't agree with them. I might as well passively agree with them because they're out for my best interest and the good of the nation, which I also believe in. People can take parts. It's not a right and wrong dichotomy type of thing. It's actually a spectrum.
No, and I think one thing about heroism is that a lot of these things that we're talking about are very high-minded things. But heroism can show up, like I said, in you're being a hero in your life by
speaking up.
Well, speaking up, but even more mundane, stuff that's going to happen every day. You open a business, you start a factory. Well, bad things are going to happen from that factory. Well, what? Well, you're taking people and you're making them work 8 hours a day. Well,
there's pollution.
But at the same time, you're providing things to people. Mm. And so no matter what you do, even if it is you open a carbon capture thing, well, people are going to be like, oh, I don't like this. So you're going to make somebody mad no matter what you do in your life. And so you have to think about it and say, is this the right action I should be taking? You have to make a decision. If you're trying to please everybody, if you're trying to not to make any enemies, well, you are going to end up not doing anything with your life ever. So you have to be sure that what you're doing is right. And this is why we need to sit down and think about our actions. You take your time, just like in Star Trek when he's got to I need to think about this, and he'll take a day to be him and haw over stuff, and he'll end up making a decision and everyone will talk about it, which is why the show was great, because it places them in situations where they are going to have to piss off a couple people, but they have to figure out what the right thing is to do, not the thing that'll make people happy. And that's, I think, what's most important is you need to figure out, if you want to be the hero, what the right thing to do is. And I can't tell you what that is. You need to figure that out for yourself.
And it's important to acknowledge that down the road, after you've made a decision, you might be wrong. And given that you made the decision with the best you could at the time, that should be comfort enough to be able to admit with humility that you made a mistake and try and fix it. So there's also this tendency of believing that once you've committed to an idea because you've spent so much time and energy thinking about it, that you double down at every front, like Trump supporters did in the light of all evidence, in the light of the courts, recommending all of his lawyers, all 7 or 9 of them, be disbarred because of their
Democrats weren't much better. I'm looking at Kamala Harris and her
no, but it's not a
treatment
better or
of the Californian. But
the idea is they're doubling down even in the light of new information that completely disregards everything that they bought into originally 5 years ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the point. The point is, even though you have good intentions and you really thought hard and you really tried to be the hero, it's still possible you're the villain. And being able to admit that and acknowledge it in light of new information down the road is heroic. Mm-hmm. It takes a lot of balls, and I don't want to be sexist about this, so I'll say it takes a lot of courage. pluck and determination and grit and integrity to admit when you're wrong and it's caused hurt.
You can't have science without that. And like everyone talks about politics, and I think we give politics too much importance in our society because it's just this soap opera. But and everyone's looking to the government too much. That's just my opinion. But like, we can't have science without someone saying, oh, I was wrong. We can't have science with saying like, that experiment, well, I guess that shows that my theory gets thrown out the window and it sucks because 10 years in the wastebasket. Now it'll work on something new. And it's hard. But you have to, and I think the other thing of that is like, we have these spheres where you have to, and a lot of times in business, you have to say, okay, we're changing tack. I was wrong. Let's move forward. And, the ability to be versatile. And in science, you have to be versatile like that. In school, you have to be versatile like that because you go into school and you're dumb in your first year. But the other part of that
first 14 years in my case.
Yeah. The other part of that is that just because you could be the villain doesn't mean like, and everyone says that like it's some deep fucking bullshit. Oops, I swore. You can see I have feelings about this. Maybe beep that out.
Yeah, I'll try to remember.
Where you go in and you say, well, we can't know if we're doing right or wrong. Well, a lot of it is that shouldn't stop you from trying to do good. And I guess like, you have to figure out whether or not you're hurting people or you're helping people. And I guess this goes down to our activism episode where, if the means justify the ends, you're probably the villain. And so if the ends justify the means, you're probably the villain. Cause like, if it doesn't matter, like if the ends are say,
have everybody fed, but the means are to take over the means of production and be a totalitarian about it.
If you're willing to do anything to get what you want, it's probably the villain. Because a hero is someone that can not compromise, but make everyone happy along the way. Not make everyone happy, but like make it so that everyone benefits at least. And that doesn't mean everyone's happy, but that means that, you make a good deal and everyone gets something out of it. I buy something, and this comes down to economics, I guess, again, but if I pay for something, I'm giving them my money. Oh, you're losing your money. Let's say, yeah, but I'm getting a thing that I want in return. And so this is a good deal. They get my money, so now they can do more things. I get the food. Now I can eat and, have that dinner party or whatever I wanted. Everyone's benefiting. This is a good deal. But a bad deal is one where it's just like, well, we need to do this. So, well, let's just take all the property of these people and then we'll have enough capital to do this. And then we can do this. And then we can, it's like, no, if the ends justify the means and you can't think of a better way to do something, you're probably the villain. So
that's why it's important to constantly reassess. That's all.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because when you're presented with new information, if your reaction to it is to dismiss it outright because you've already decided, guaranteed you're wrong. Almost in every case. There's never a case where new information should not be looked at or considered, because that's not scientific. Science considers all information, not selective cherry-picked data.
Yeah.
We've talked about ad nausea before, so anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up? No,
I think I've said everything. I made my declarations. Thank you guys for tuning in. Hope you have enjoyed it and had something to think about. Tell us in the comments if you've gotten this far, the heroes that you grew up with and how they influenced your life, maybe. See what kind of heroes you guys followed, how you got to the wonderful places that you've gotten to in your lives. Mm-hmm. So thank you guys for watching.
You've been listening to Frivolous Gravitas. Christopher Driver is myself, and with me, Jordan Roy. Have a good one.
See ya.